You grew up in a world that didn't slow down for you. No constant supervision, no endless guidance, just a quiet understanding. Figure it out. While other generations were shaped by structure or constant connection, yours was shaped by something very different: space. Space to think, space to struggle, and sometimes space to feel alone. And that space didn't just pass time, it built something inside you that most people don't fully understand. Generation X didn't grow up with the internet telling them who to be. There were no algorithms shaping your identity, no social media validating your choices. If you wanted to understand something, you had to experience it. If you had a problem, you had to solve it. That created a mindset that is deeply independent, but also quietly guarded. Because when you learn early that no one is constantly watching over you, you stop expecting help and start relying on yourself. This is why Gen X is often called the forgotten generation, not because they didn't matter, but because they didn't demand attention. They learned to operate without it. While louder generations expressed themselves openly, Gen X adapted by observing, adjusting, and moving forward without needing validation. But that comes with a psychological trade-off. When you don't express everything outwardly, a lot stays internal. There's also something unique about growing up during massive transitions. Gen X witnessed the shift from analog to digital, from slower life to hyper-connected systems. You remember a time before constant noise, before every moment was documented. That contrast created a deeper awareness. You know what it feels like to be disconnected, and you also know what it feels like to be overwhelmed by connection. That's why many Gen X individuals value privacy more than exposure, not because they're secretive, but because they understand the cost of constant visibility. Another key trait is skepticism. Gen X doesn't easily trust systems, institutions, or surface-level narratives, and that didn't come from nowhere. It came from growing up during economic uncertainty, changing social structures, and seeing promises that didn't always hold up. Over time, the brain adapts to protect itself. Instead of blindly believing, it questions. Instead of assuming stability, it prepares for change. This creates resilience, but also a tendency to keep emotional distance. There's also the way Gen X handles responsibility. Many in this generation became independent earlier than expected, whether it was taking care of themselves, managing problems alone, or navigating adult-like situations at a young age. Responsibility wasn't introduced gently, it was absorbed quickly. That shapes a person. It creates capability, but it can also create pressure. Because when you're used to handling everything yourself, it becomes difficult to ask for help later in life. Emotionally, Gen X tends to process things differently. It's not that feelings aren't there, they are, but they're often filtered, controlled, or delayed. You learned that expressing too much doesn't always change anything. So instead, you adapt, you move forward, you carry things quietly. This creates a kind of emotional strength, but also a habit of internalizing more than you release. Relationships are also shaped by this psychology. Gen X values loyalty and authenticity, but they don't always open up quickly. Trust is built slowly, not given easily, because when you grow up learning to depend on yourself, letting someone else in isn't automatic, it's intentional. That's why Gen X relationships often feel deeper, but fewer. It's quality over quantity, connection over noise. There's also a constant balancing act happening internally. On one side, there's independence, the need to handle things alone. On the other, there's the human need for connection and understanding. That tension doesn't always show on the surface, but it exists. It's the reason why Gen X can appear calm and composed, even when processing a lot internally. Work and purpose are also viewed differently. Gen X doesn't chase meaning the same way newer generations do. For them, work was often about stability, responsibility, and providing security. But over time, many started questioning that structure, not loudly, not dramatically, but internally, asking themselves whether the path they followed was chosen or simply accepted. And then there's adaptability. Few generations have had to adjust as much as Gen X, from technology shifts to cultural changes, from traditional systems to modern unpredictability. You've had to continuously recalibrate. That builds a unique kind of mental flexibility. You don't panic easily when things change. You've seen change before. You've lived through it. But adaptability can also become silent pressure, because when you're used to adjusting, you rarely stop to ask whether you actually want what you've adapted to. You keep moving forward, solving problems, handling responsibilities, without always pausing to reflect on what you need personally. The most important thing to understand about Gen X psychology is this: it's not defined by what was given to them, it's defined by what they had to figure out on their own. That creates strength, awareness, and independence, but it also creates patterns of self-reliance that can sometimes limit connection, expression, and rest. Because knowing how to handle everything doesn't mean you should have to handle everything alone. And maybe that's the deeper realization, that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, that strength doesn't require silence, and that even a generation built on self-reliance still deserves space to be understood. And now I'm curious, do you feel like growing up without constant guidance made you stronger or just more used to handling things alone? Let me know in the comments.